What was the most badass thing you've seen someone else do which made you respect them deeply from that moment onwards? In my wind ensemble college class, our tuba player came in about half an hour late with his face covered in ash. He is a firefighter who just put out a house fire and then went straight to class. In some of my music classes, one guy was a volunteer firefighter. Profs never even blinked if he suddenly rushed out of class because they knew he was doing something much more important. Good guy. My father is a woodworker. When I was about 4 years old, I came into his workshop to call him for supper. He had just accidentally cut off his middle finger in a bandsaw, and while staunching the blood flow calmly asked me to go get my mother and tell her he had a hospital away. I can still remember how calm he looked despite the situation, and it has always inspired me. He turned a situation that could have traumatized me into a learning experience. Surgical fellow who stayed at the bedside overnight when he didn't have to. We knew we'd be lucky to get this kid through the night. 3-year-old post-cardiac surgery who had an open chest. The fellow could be sleeping in an on-call room until our team called for his assistance, but he sat right there at the bedside. Girl's heart started having a hard time around 300 am. He grabs a scalpel, cleans the patch over her open chest, slices open the patch, reaches into her chest with his gloved hand and started internal compressions by manually squeezing her heart. He did that for over 15 minutes until the primary surgeon arrived. She went home some weeks later a happy and healthy little girl, no brain damage and alive because of his quick action. Of course, he didn't get the credit. The lead surgeon got all the kudos. Dr. R.B. You're MF badass in my book. Holy freaking crap, that is intense as frick. When I was 5, my parents took my sisters and I to a lake up in the mountains. Being the show off that I am, I climbed up on the largest rock I could find and jumped in with my legs tucked under me. There was something sharp in the water and my ankle was severed through the bone, nerves, tendons, everything. The only thing holding my foot on was one patch of skin at the back of my leg. My mother saw the blood in the water and screamed for my dad. He picked me up, sat me down on the shore, ripped his t-shirt apart into strips and wrapped tourniquets up and down my leg to stop the bleeding. He then got my 2 screaming sisters and my mom into the car and drove like a madman the 20 miles down the hill to the hospital. On the way down, a cop tried to pull him over for speeding. My dad waved him forward, and when the cop saw my father shirtless and covered in blood, he let us keep going. By the time we got to the hospital I was in shock, and when the doctors saw the damage to my leg they decided to amputate. My father refused to give his permission for the surgery and insisted they find a way to save my leg. They did. My dad saved my leg and my life. There's not a day goes by that I don't miss him. He was a total badass. My family and I were camping by a river once, and my brother, my sister, and I were hanging by the riverbank. My sister fell in and started getting taken away by the current, and my stepfather, without hesitating, ran straight to the river, dove in and saved her. It was an awesome thing to witness when I was a kid. I really didn't like my stepfather at all growing up because he was strict with discipline, but I have boundless respect for him now because of how I turned out, which I think is pretty okay. I love hearing those stories. Stepdads get a terrible rap, but the good ones never make the news. I was at the park with my big brother, eating lunch next to a lake, when we saw a truck backing up to the water. A really sketchy guy pulled out a box, from which we heard yelping and whimpering coming from. He then proceeded to throw said box into the lake. In shock I just sat there, but my brother quickly dove into the water and went for the box. He got it out, after quite a struggle, and opened it. Inside were 4 of the cutest little puppies ever. Sadly we didn't get a license plate number, so we couldn't do anything about the guy, but he saved the puppies, so there is that. Since that day my brother has been my hero. My paternal grandfather is 80, and ever since I was a kid he's had the same morning routine. He would wake up, meditate, do stretches, do 50 push-ups and 50 crunches. I remember staring at him in complete awe as a child, because all my friends' grandpas or typical old people I would see on TV were never as athletic as my pa. We've always gone golfing and mountain biking together and I can barely even keep up. Near his house there used to be this forest that he called the loop-de-loop forest that had a bunch of crazy natural BMX jumps and crap. We'd laugh and have an awesome time as he'd show me all these crazy tricks on his bike. In his late 60s. He's also a pool shark, taught me everything I know and a fantastic skier. He's such an inspiration to me and the most badass pa ever. I seriously hope to be as athletic to him when I'm a senior. Sometimes I don't even think he's real. One time I watched him build a birdhouse as a kid when 2 flies were buzzing loudly around him in the garage. Without saying a word, he does the most fluid, graceful motion with his hand and catches both the flies. Then he calmly walked outside, opened his hand and they both flew away. I remember thinking, dang, my pa is the coolest freaking human ever. TLDR. My grandpa is 80 and still mountain bikes and ski ice. You may have been raised by a Jedi, you should look into that. Ages back, when I was but a wee and punkish youth, my friends and I took it upon ourselves to head to the local fly-by-night carnival that had set up in a dingy field on the edge of town. There was the usual assortment of pricey games for crappy prizes, and rides that rattled and moaned like they were inches away from shaking themselves to oblivion. Dauntless, we chose to ride one, the Gravataran, one of those spinning deals where you get pressed against the wall. As the ride is loading, a couple enters with a very young daughter, whom the male of the couple decided to hold on his chest. This seemed like a very bad idea, but who were we to question? The ride continues to fill, and across the drum from that couple, a big, mean-looking biker dude settles into his spot. The ride operator, in a little booth in the middle of the ride, starts the gears in play, then puts on his headphones and starts reading a magazine of the adult variety as the ride begins to spin. Sure enough, about halfway through the ride, disaster strikes. The wee girl slips from the guy's chest and rolls to the side, her head slipping between the slats that everyone was pressed against. The slats that, when the ride stops, pinch closed. People start screaming, imagining what is gonna happen to the little girl. Some folks are trying to get the ride operator's attention, but he is otherwise occupied, and their shouts can barely be heard above the din of the machine. Suddenly, above the din, we hear a roar like a lion. Across the way, we watch the biker dude straining and roaring as he pulls himself from the wall. He forces himself forward, his muscles straining, and reaching out, grabs a rail that is in front of him, and then slowly, carefully, fights the force of the Gravataran as he pulls himself around to the little girl, placing his feet either side of her. He continues to fight the tremendous force to lower himself down carefully, then reaches down, scoops her in his arms, and brings her to his chest, holding her tightly against the power of the spinning ride. Finally, the operator looks up, sees what is happening, and slows the ride. The biker guy hangs on as the ride slows enough that people can move again, then finally sets the girl down as the spinning stops. He looks as if he might collapse, but then stands up, gives the girl's presumed dad a stern look, then turns his mighty, vengeful gaze on the ride operator. He leans over the rail, and in a deep, menacing tone, says, "You need to pay more attention to your work, boy," and then he exited the ride. Sheer, utter, total badass. He looks as if he might collapse, but then stands up, gives the girl's presumed dad a stern look, then turns his mighty, vengeful gaze on the ride operator. Boy, I love that part. Nice story, though. When I was young, very young, my parents got a divorce. They remained friends since they had known each other for years and years and years. Anyway, one night my mom was dropping me off to my dad and they had agreed to meet at a hotel close to, in between them they lived in different cities. As my mom dropped me off and was leaving, 2 men tried to pick up on my mom and she wasn't having it. She told them to frick off and they weren't having that. So one of them grabbed my mom's arm and my dad went ballistic. He walked over and told them to leave or crap was gonna go down. They guys looked at each other and both punched my dad in the face. Now my dad, being the total badass he was, stumbled back, shook it off, and tackled the closest one. He punched him about 4 times and the guy was out cold. His friend then took it upon himself to pick up a metal pipe or something large, metallic and pipe-like, and swing it at my dad's knee, cracking his kneecap and tearing his ACL and MCL. So what does my dad do, you ask? He freaking stands up and knocks this guy the frick out with one punch and then drove himself to the hospital, all with me in tow. Absolutely hysterical. Not one time did he show the massive amount of pain I knew he was in, and then made me respect him that much more. When I was younger, drinking age here is 18. I was in a small local pub on my own. I'd never been to a pub to drink as I'd just come of age. I was sitting quietly enjoying a beer waiting for a friend when some guy came up to me and started talking to me and asking questions. He creeped me out, the kind of person you get an instant bad vibe from. It was a small town, and he knew who I was, but I had no idea who he was. My father was the personnel manager at the place this guy worked at. Dad hired and fired. My dad is a very nice bloke, but obviously his job is very controversial, as he has responsibility to let people go. Apparently this guy had been sacked by my father, and judging by his character, it was probably deserved. He'd taken exception to me, even though I didn't know him, and started becoming aggressive towards me and saying condescending things like "I bet you're pee up daddy's money." I was always a shy and anxious kind of kid, and the guy was really intimidating, especially as I was young and he was a bit older. He had tattoos, beard, rough face, etc. All I could do was sit there staring at my beer looking red-faced and intimidated while this guy kept berating me. Out of nowhere this younger fella who'd clearly been listening in, stepped between myself and him and told the guy to pack his crap and frick off. He didn't back down until the guy left me alone. He even defended my father's integrity, which I was too chicken crap to do. The guy was a total legend, and I'll never forget it. Good dude. Takes balls to stick up for total strangers. 30 years ago, my mother was run over by a beer truck. It went right over one of her legs, up and over her pregnant stomach. Multiple eyewitness accounts said that she lifted the truck off of her belly. She had track marks on her legs and her shoulder, but scant few on her belly. She had to have a lot of skin grafted from her good leg onto her bad leg and spent many months in the hospital while pregnant. Everyone was sure that the baby wouldn't make it. In addition to my oldest sister, who survived with no discernible damage, my mom went on to have 2 more kids, me being the youngest. She is a survivor of rape. She is a cancer survivor. Well, she had shingles no less, and lived with her intestines getting twisted after her uterine cancer surgery was botched for 7 years. She worked service industry for 40 years and we didn't have insurance. She was the sole breadwinner for my family, as my dad is disabled. She is one of the most upbeat people that I have ever met. She dances when it rains on her parade and always has a kind ear for people who need to vent. She still works long hours, for just above minimum wage, in a nursing home doing the job of an activities director. Physically, it's very hard on her 64-year-old body, but she never complains about it. I can't think of a single person who is more badass than she is. I think I need to give her a call and let her know how much she means to me. TLDR, Mom was ran over by a beer truck. While pregnant, she lifted the truck off of her belly long enough to save my oldest sister. She is a survivor of rape. She survived cancer while she had shingles. She survived a botched surgery that twisted her intestines closed. She was the sole breadwinner for my family, and she never complains, and still makes everyone around her smile. Well, you win. Back in high school, a friend of mine, let's call him Richard, had a severe addiction to drugs. He was one of those guys you could see living in a drug den in the not too distant future. He was short, thin, meek, and a little nerdy. Well, one day we were coming home from school. I had a broken leg at the time and was on crutches, and these guys drove by and shot us with paintball guns. It was at that moment I gained a new respect for Richard. He throws his hands in the air and starts yelling at the car. They stop, and just as the driver gets out, Richard runs over, punches him in the face, knocked out. The other 2 accomplices get out of the car and Richard fights both of them and wins. In the middle of the crowded intersection, cops get called. Paintballers get arrested. Never saw Richard the same after that. Bonus story. Couple months later, Richard got caught dealing drugs by the same cop that arrested the paintballers. The cop looked the other way and Richard took it as a sign and got his crap together. Glad he got a break and didn't blow it. Also glad the douchebags in the car got their asses beat by one guy. They'll never live down the humiliation. My mom's friend had been staying with us for a few days because he had lost his house and was waiting for them to finish fixing up the house he had just rented. Now, before I go any further, let me describe this man. He was a bodybuilder. He was over 6 feet tall and built like a rock. His arms were bigger around than my head, and it was all muscle. So, one night while he's there, I'm sitting on the computer in my room, on my dial-up internet, and all of a sudden I hear someone banging furiously on my front door. I peek out to see who it is, and it's this other friend of my mom's, not the same guy I described before. I open the door, and what do I see? I see this guy standing there in nothing but his underwear, a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and he's got a great big hunting knife in his hand. He starts yelling at me, clearly drunk off his butt. I've been trying to call here for the last 2 freaking hours. I bet you're freaking online again. I'm like, whoa, sorry, chill out, man. He pushes the door in, raises his knife up into the air and screams, I'll teach you to frick with me, you fricking brat. All of a sudden, bodybuilder guy comes rushing up behind me, pushes me against the far wall, away from knife guy, so hard that I dent the wall, then proceeds to grab this guy's hand, a guy holding a giant freaking hunting knife, and breaks his hand with his bare hand. Knife guy drops the knife and screams in pain. He slams knife guy into the wall, putting another dent in that one, pulls his arm behind his back, breaking that too, then slams him headfirst onto the tile in a submission hold. My mom comes out in a panic, not realizing what is going on, and tells bodybuilder guy not to kill knife guy, and that she knows him. Bodybuilder then proceeds to drag him outside, by his broken arm no less, and toss him down the stairs, into my building's parking lot, and tells him to get the heck out and never come back. He manages to somehow scamper to his car, and even more amazingly, somehow manages to not hit any other cars or people on the way out. The next day he calls us from the hospital, saying he blacked out last night and woke up with a broken hand and arm and had no idea what the heck happened. He didn't remember any of it. He actually showed up a few days later and got down on his knees, crying, and apologized to me. TLDR. Guy tries to kill me with a knife. Bodybuilder guy grabs knife guy's hand, breaking it while he was holding the knife, breaks his arm, pins him to the ground, nearly kills him, and then tosses him out into the street. Knife guy was drunk and didn't even remember what happened. I liked the mental image of a guy in underwear and a cowboy hat getting his butt kicked more than I really should have. The night before my wedding, many drinks were had and there was a bit of an accident that involved my brother-in-law to be taking a bit of a fall. Turns out, he'd snapped his collarbone clean through, but he refused to go to the hospital. Heck, he didn't even mention it until the ceremony and reception were complete because he didn't want to risk spoiling the wedding. My brother used to pat my mother's hand and tell her everything was going to be alright. He was 5 and had leukemia, and would tell her this whenever he was going through a particularly painful bad procedure, spinal taps, etc. He wouldn't cry because he didn't want my mom to worry about him. I thought it was pretty badass for a little kid, especially since I bawled like a baby every time they took my blood for him. This isn't bad but it did inspire deep respect. I was dating a guy and I went with him when he wanted to visit his grandpa in a nursing home. Grandpa was miserable being there. My boyfriend got into bed with him, cradled him in his arms, and just held him for the longest time. It was the most loving act I've witnessed between human beings. I think you're wrong. That was indeed bad but used to work as a whitewater canoe guide. Every summer we'd do about a week of training just to brush up everyone's paddle rescue skills and make sure we were all ready for wherever it was we were getting shipped off to that season. We were on a river that was known to be hazardous, as this section of it was accessible by car and had been modified into a course for races. This meant fairly large features, boulder peninsulas right out into the river, and a particularly hairy section at the washout known only as the Attur Slide, where about 6 inches of glassy water went tearing over a sharply flaked concrete bed. Great paddling, but more dangerous swimming than most of the remote natural rivers we spend our time on. We were just upstream of the Attur Slide when one of the guide boats came down, miscalculated a maneuver, and caused one girl to be pinned to a doghouse-sized boulder chest first. The force of the water was keeping her stuck to it, with her arms and legs wrapped around it like a starfish. She couldn't get any leverage with any of her limbs, with the water rushing over her helmet making only the narrowest air pocket for her face. I was watching all this happen from an eddy about 100 meters upstream. A good friend of mine, While everyone was still in the wait, is this real phase of coming to terms situation, went bounding along the rock peninsula, jumped into the current upstream of her, grabbed her PFD personal flotation device, and held on while he let the current and the mainstream peel them both off the rock together. He then swam her into the eddy just below the peninsula, which was just above the Attur Slide. It was a balls out, no time to think rescue. Everyone admired that because it was the kind of situation we all wondered how we'd react in, since so much of our training focused on that. But Alex was the one that ultimately reacted, like a boss. It was one of those moments where I knew I'd have a solid partner if we ever ended up leading a trip together. Last year playing football with friends, I fell on someone else in a strange way and he dislocated his knee. His knee was visibly out of place and he was shouting in pain. Suddenly he just stopped, looked at his knee and smacked as hard as he could back into place. It was one of the most disgustingly manly thing I've ever seen. Art class in my old school, someone threw a shoe at my head from across the class. Friend sitting next to me and I had our heads down, not really paying attention to the antics going on around us. Out of nowhere his hand shoots up and catches the shoe inches from my head. Everyone in the class stopped and he looked very confused. At university I had a lecturer who I always thought was a little bit of an elitist and looked down on the students. Until the day he came to the pub with us, of course, sank 5 or 6 pints of beer and perfectly executed a cartwheel with the cigarettes in his mouth. So he was better than you. I was getting in trouble at school for laughing at a joke that another student had said. The entire class was laughing at it, but the teacher hated me and picked on me. She told me to go see the principal. My friend, the girl who told the joke, stuck up for me. And then another guy in the class stood up and said, if you send her, I am going as well. Because I was laughing too, the rest of the class agreed. And were all prepared to go to office to see the principal. We were all in grade 6 too. Since then I've always respected that guy for standing up for me first to the teacher. I am Spartacus. The story of Dong Hoyt and his son Rick, who has cerebral palsy. He has run 200 plus triathlons including 6 Ironmans. He pulls his son in a boat for the swim portion, rides with him in a special seat for the ride and pushes him for the running part. Just YouTube Team Hoyt and see what a badass this father is. I saw a guy in the Afghan National Army jump onto the hood of his Humvee and hip fire a 240 Bravo machine gun, heavy as frick, almost 45-50 pounds, at enemy combatants in a firefight. Still incredibly badass, but the 240B is around 27 pounds, maybe 29 loaded. Source: I had to lug one of those bastards on road marches far too many times. Also quick check of Wikipedia LOL. Early upon joining the Australian Army around a decade ago now, I had arrived at my employment training a few days ahead of who would later be my best friend. I saw his pull up on my way back from dinner, so decided to help carry trunks and stuff in. It wasn't long before people got silly. This is fairly normal in a workforce of 18-year-old kids all in one area. I was just dropping off a trunk in someone's room when I heard, "Hey Del, your mum is a W." I instinctively turned around to see what is going on. What I saw made us great friends since. I saw a skinny nerdy little kid fly past the doorway in a perfectly formed flying sidekick. It landed beautifully in the target's face and knocked him down. Bros for life. That's the most boring insult. Hope that kick knocked some creativity into him. I was about 6 and it was Halloween time. We had many pumpkins and my dad had a couple swords, but until then I thought they were just for decoration. I walk outside to the small outdoor area of our apartment and happen to come just as my mother tree a pumpkin in the air and my father taking his sword and slicing it in half midair. He turned and have me this look like he knew that was badass, but he wasn't going to brag. I just stood there in awe. This started a family tradition of samurai pumpkin. Fruit ninja. When my dad, firefighter, talks about the woods fires he's been on, I don't know if you've ever been up close to one, but they're scary as frick. My friend Mark is a big guy, tall, thick, just huge, nicest guy. For some reason, random dudes like to try to fight big guys like him. Anyway, we're all out and some punk kid comes up trying to start a fight. He's going on and on talking crap trying to get Mark riled up. Mark is telling him to leave him alone. Finally, the kid says something about Mark's mom. The thing is, Mark's mother died of a brain aneurysm in front of him not that long ago, so it's an especially touchy subject. This was the straw that caused Mark to get out of his seat, grab the guy by the back of the head, not saying a word, and head-butted the guy. He crumpled in a heap on the floor. Mark sat back down. Moral is, frick with Mark all you want, but leave his mother out of it. He's the man. My condolences to your friend Mark. That guy who tried to start a fight with him. They should just disappear. They are useless. There was a kid in my neighborhood that was a real idiot. He would tie a boombox around his neck and play Eye of the Tiger while running with his poor old dog. It was funny to watch. Most embarrassing. Especially for his older sister. Fast forward 8 or so years. He is in school and is bullied regularly. One day in a large study hall, this kid in front of him keeps turning around and smacking him. No one thought it was funny and told the bully to stop. 200 plus people in this study hall. Finally, emboldened by the support, the victim stands up. The bully smiles and says, "What are you gonna do?" Bam. 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 The victim hits the kid, blows his nose into a spray of blood, and knocks him out cold. He continues to kick the kid until he is subdued by the principal. He is walked off to a standing ovation. The bully is helped up, and humiliated. He says he needs no help walking, then promptly falls down a flight of steps. I found out later that the kid was doing Golden Gloves boxing, since he was the dorky kid running with his boombox. I tease the thrill of the fight motherfucker. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.